there is a terrible theology of what worship and singing now is in the church that is far closer linked to sales and marketing and to therapy than it is to holy worship. And so we need to get a clear theology of what we're doing.
Music and family have always been connected for me. My grandfather taught me the Christian faith largely through our Welsh heritage of singing. And shortly before he died, our family gathered around the piano as my mother played, and we sang many of his favorites from the Methodist hymnal. And every night now, with my own family, we open up the hymnal and sing some of these famous Welsh hymns, including Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. And his great Methodist hymn, the great Methodist hymn writer Charles Wesley wrote, Jesus Lover of My Soul, commonly set to a Welsh tune, a-ber-ist-with. And now if you're a fan of the TV show The Crown, you'll actually recognize that song from the really moving episode Aberfan. So you can see that I'm really partial to the old hymns, but unfortunately, we've pretty much worn out the binding on my old Methodist hymnal. And when I'm singing with my family, we also want to include some newer songs that we all sing together in church, songs that have played such a big role in my own generation's faith, songs like In Christ Alone, Speak, O Lord, and The Lord is My Salvation, all written by Keith Getty. In their introduction, Keith and his wife Kristen write, hymns are the heart language of the church, used to sing truth to the Lord and to one another in every season of the soul. This has always been the way. Our hymns hold us, inspire us, comfort us, and form us. Now, you know Keith Getty, a songwriter of some of your most beloved songs, a choir director, a musician, a movement leader. Hopefully you've sung with Keith and Kristen at one of several TGC national conferences, and he joins me on Gospelbound now to discuss changes in church music, liturgy, and the legacy of the hymnal. Keith, welcome to Gospelbound.
Colin, it's an honor to be here, and it's great to see you again. And talking about your Welsh hymn heritage is quite moving as well. It's good to hear. I'm glad to hear that.
We'll press into that a little bit more here.
Yeah, they sing that Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah will never, it will always have mixed emotions for me, because the Welsh sing it to Cumranda, their tune. They sing that at the rugby matches when they're beating Ireland. And as we've beaten them in 7 of the last 8 years, I haven't had to listen to it too much. Thank you.
You got to rub it in.
But it does have very mixed emotions if you're a hot-blooded Irish rugby and hymn lover.
Well, that's part of my point, is that as I didn't realize this until I was growing up, of how ingrained that tradition of hymn singing and singing in general is within that culture in particular, to the point of it being a kind of national call in what they're doing today.
The Welsh probably the most of the 4 home nations, but it's an interesting stat, for example, that I think American churches, for the most part, sing about 1 in every 6 songs they sing in church are now hymns. Whereas in Britain on a Sunday, we've got the BBC television, have the show Songs of Praise, which has been going since just the end of the Second World War. And that song has 3 times as many viewers on Sunday than people who go to church. So hymns is 3 times the attraction that church has on a Sunday in Britain. Church has 6 times the attraction that hymns have in America. So there is definitely a unique, interesting, cultural difference.
But often better theology in the hymns. Not always. It's one of the problems why I use the older Methodist hymnal than the newer Methodist hymnal.
And that's right. But there's a serious point with that, because, the very first, you go back to Deuteronomy, where the first hymns in Scripture come. And it says, teach this to the children, that it's a witness against them, lest they turn away. In other words, from the very beginning of Scriptures, hymns are never less than instructional. So what you have your children singing, listening to on their phones, or what you choose to sing in Sunday school or in church or in youth group or in home group, can never be less than instructional. So it really is a huge pastoral responsibility for any pastor or for any parent.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I often say about family devotions, and why I use a hymnal, is that it connects my children to something that's bigger and broader and longer than themselves. They see themselves as part of a bigger story. They see themselves as part of a legacy, a family of faith. And I think that's something that's been lost in a lot of contemporary churches and in the loss of home worship. But it's something that I think you guys are making a huge contribution to. And I'm so excited about this because my family devotions consist of the New City Catechism, which is a Crossway project that I worked closely with Tim Keller on. Then we work through the Biggest Story and those videos with Kevin DeYoung, another Crossway project. And then we go over the piano, and now we have the Sing Hymnal, a wonderful Crossway project there as well. And I want to read something, Keith, from your introduction, something that you and Kristen write. It's so important. You say, some of the earliest memories either of us can remember are of singing with others at church. The accompaniment begins, songbook pages rustle, and that first shared breath is drawn as old and young step into a hymn together. We are so grateful to have been raised in homes where singing to the Lord as a part of God's family was the most natural and fitting thing in the world, treasured as the highest expression of the Creator's gift of music. But it is too risky for us to assume that deep belief in the truths of God will flow with ease to the next generation. That depth must always be mined and cherished and taught. That's just beautiful, profound, poignant. Keith, just tell us a little bit more about how this hymnal came about, your vision for it.
No, that's sure. It's been a huge team effort. Anyone who knows me knows I can barely organize how to get downtown for dinner without making a mess of it. And so, it really, when you have that limited organizational ability, it should always be acknowledged that it's a project with many, many people. John Martin and the Getty Music team, Joyce Dennis and the Crossway team, all hugely part of it. So but I think it was a number of things. I think probably the two biggest convictions were that everybody today needs to be singing more of the hymns that have lasted. And number two, that every person in leadership today needs to be curating what is sung. And so even for those, whether you're coming to the Sing Conference to do the hymnal, whether you're picking up the hymnal, that's our two prayers. That's the two ways I think we can really, we can really help make a significant shift into the pastoral health of the next generation and the church broadly. It's interesting. If I could go back, I'm so thankful for the opportunities I've had in the last 25 years. But if I could go back and do it all again, I think I would have prioritized things a little bit different. Back in 18, before Packer and I had the whole link between the ESV and the Sing Hymnal, I got to do the last interview of his life, and he talked for almost 4 hours on worship. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he had a lot of content because he talked very, very slowly by that point. But one of the things he said was, I think we need 3 old hymns for every new hymn. I says, yeah. I think given the pastoral value that knowing a hymn that you will sing for 50 years has, as opposed to knowing a song that you will sing for maximum 5 years, given the difference in that, I can't see a logic that says we should be singing any more than one for every 3 old hymns. I mean, C.S. Lewis, of course, famously said it. Say we read one book for every one old book, and the book of Jeremiah reminds us about the old trodden paths. And so I think from the start, obviously, when we got involved in 2000, there was such a buzz around modern worship music. And we were kind of just desperate. If we don't get some new songs out there that are saying something, the battle for truth, the battle for even just gospel sanctification was being spectacularly lost in what was being sung in churches, and the confusion amongst leaders and the ineptness to have any kind of bigger vision or defensive response was nowhere. And so we were very obsessed with trying to write a few decent songs, but I think I would have tried to sooner encourage people to sing the great hymns that we know will last. Obviously, we hope some of ours might last for a while, but sure, there really isn't a whole lot of evidence, unless we can go forward in a time machine to know that. So that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is that I think the curation of our worship services, I think if Martin Luther could come back today, I think if St. Augustine could come back today, the curation of the worship service would be a bigger concern for them even than preaching. Simply because, most of church history was built largely in the Psalms. And when it wasn't, it was built on liturgical services, localized singing, or then, of course, post-Gutenberg print and press and Martin Luther, it was the hymnals. And in a new world where you've over 300,000 songs, in the CCLI songbook, and most pastors kind of turning a blind eye or washing their hands of what's being sung in their churches, or at least having a vision of what's being sung in their churches that then works its way down. I think we're reaching a lot of very dangerous ground, and so I think that's the two goals. If the hymnal can do that, by introducing some great hymns and by creating a form of curation, then we are thrilled. But secondly, even if it doesn't do that, if it raises the issue of the great hymns that we sing, and church leaders and family leaders saying, here are the hymns we want our people to grow old with, then I think that's an important thing.
I find it interesting, Keith, that a classic hymn doesn't sound to me today out of fashion. It sounds actually kind of timeless and classic. Whereas sometimes the contemporary music can feel very dated. Like say, oh, that really sounds like this particular point in time. Does that fit into your vision at all as well, of just singing songs that you know are going to last and are not going to feel like, oh, that belongs to, like, I can smell what that song sounds like. I can see it because I can see the clothes that people were wearing. Is that part of the vision too?
I think certainly being able to sing a song that you can live with for 50 years. An obvious illustration, being Irish, is to take "Be Thou My Vision," which is probably the oldest Irish hymn. If for no other reason, then at least it was inspired by St. Patrick's breastplate. But
it doesn't sound old, is my point.
That's right.
It doesn't sound old. It sounds classic. It sounds timeless.
And then when you're talking to the pastors who are listening to this conversation, parents and grandparents who are listening to this conversation, you think about "Be Thou My Vision," then you think about your grandchildren, your people, and say, "Be Thou My Wisdom." Then you think about temptation, and I think of my children going to college, and I think, "Be Thou my breastplate, sword for the fight." And then I think of my kids going off and however life treats them, and they'll all have different levels of successes. And I think of "Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise, thou mine inheritance." And then, of course, the fact that all of us, death and taxes come on all of us. And so, "High King of Heaven," after Victory One, there is a song that speaks to my whole life, for my whole life, and gives me language, gives me a sung grammar that will actually affect my prayer life and my thinking and my actions and my reactions. So that is why it is so important. And that's why kind of doing pastors who do tools down and let them sing the modern songs in their churches are crippling their congregations by their cowardice and their inaction. And the modern worship music is, I mean, at a general level, is trying to write songs that sound relevant to the music of the moment, which means by logical deduction, ask C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, or anybody else, in 10 years' time, they will not sound logical. You don't need to ask C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. You can ask any one of your kids, because they're not listening to stuff that was written 10 years ago. And so that's the thing. And perhaps even in contemporary Christian music, you're basically building a significantly sized industry, which is based on Christian radio, which is trying to reach two very specific people who are at very specific times in their lives in 2 minutes 54 with something that makes them feel good in drive time. That's the business, and there's nothing wrong with that business. That's a perfectly legitimate and largely, I would say, probably more wholesome than not wholesome thing to have. But it shouldn't be what's deciding our Sunday worship. It shouldn't be the thing that is governing how our people understand God, how they understand sin, how they understand forgiveness, how they understand how we interact with ourselves, our families, our churches, our communities, and a lost world that needs the few minutes that we have left on this earth to serve Christ and His gospel and His kingdom.
Charles Wesley wrote maybe as many as 9,000 different hymns. We're not quite sure.
He wrote a lot. He was pretty good.
He was pretty good. But I think what's interesting is that he's not good because of the volume. He's good because of the few songs that endured.
Yeah.
And they're absolute classics. What makes an excellent hymn? I'm just wondering, what criteria did you guys use for choosing the 500 songs in the hymnal? It's a different standard because it's not like a screen where you can just add a new one tomorrow when it becomes popular and drop it out and nobody will know. You're locked in. At least Just until you do a new printed edition,
Yeah.
which obviously you could do.
Well, of course, the funny answer to that question is if I knew how to make a great hymn, I wouldn't tell you. I'd do it myself. Do you know what I mean? But the question you're actually asking is how do you choose the ones that you do? And here's the thing: a hymnal is simply a collection. I mean, the Psalms is the Bible's hymnal. You know, that's the same conference this year. We're doing the talks are predictably all on the Psalms, which is the Bible's hymn book. But a hymnal is just a collection of songs for a collection. If I was asked to write a hymnal for urban churches today, I wouldn't have done this. If I was asked to write a hymnal for European churches or churches in South America or churches for expats across Europe, I wouldn't have chosen these songs. These songs were chosen largely for people who are in the Crossway constituency. And so you're thinking about, so that's the first thing I would say is it doesn't, you know, each context would be at some levels different, but
Sure.
but broadly what we did, we tried to find about 2/3 of the hymnal was hymns that have lasted and we hope will last. And there are about three-quarters of them were hymns that have lasted, are valuable, are playable in a modern church, i.e. don't require the pure beauty of choral music to work. Although I myself obviously trained that way.
Yeah.
And then 1/4 would be hymns written mostly in this last movement of the last 25 years, which has been an unusual movement of actually what we consider pretty good quality hymns. Because each hymnal, whether it's Vaughan Williams's hymnal, whether it's Trinity hymnal, whether it's Wesley's hymnal, Watts's hymnals, they all came on the back of a movement where there had been a new collection of hymns that weren't in a hymnal. So in some ways, this hymnal will also be identified by the fact that it is the first major hymnal to represent this modern movement of hymns and include them. But largely it's what are the hymns that I want to grow old with? That's the first thing.
Yeah.
And then, but that work in a modern church that can exist. Obviously, I think it's better with a choir, but doesn't have to have a choir because most churches today don't have a choir. And then what we did was we give it a liturgical shape. So we said, let's look at the liturgy of the service, the liturgy of the Christian life, and the liturgy of the life of Christ, or the church's year, however you call it. And so we actually created each of those sections because that helps people shape a service. That helps people have language for each part of life, and then help to understand each part of Christ's life and teachings. And so we did it that way. We did a couple of things that were a little bit different. We included, obviously, a lot of Bible passages from the ESV and also prayers, liturgies, and quotes, mostly from Christian history. But we also went to so many of the people over the years who've contributed to the Sing Hymnal, from Tim Keller to John Piper to John MacArthur to the more creative end of it, from Sally Lloyd-Jones to Malcolm Guite. And Kristen, the number of her prayers that she's done over the years. So we tried to give people, I think so much of the battle today isn't just for what we're singing in our church, but it's for how we pray. It's for how we shape the service. And just also the value of just reading the Bible in our church services, which is so huge. So we tried to do, and then we also tried to do at the back of it, we did a story behind every hymn in the book. So to try and make a hymnal with personality that people can understand why this hymn was important, because most people, you know, when your parents grew up and got a new hymnal, they presumed to know 3/4 of it, but were curious what the new ones would be. Most people today will not know 3/4 of this hymnal, or even why they should have a hymnal. So that's actually a whole new culture shift that we're having to fight against, because most people are going, why would we even have a hymnal? Aren't there screens now? And you know, we've stopped using typewriters, so why would we have a hymnal? So
Right.
And most of our books are on our phone. So I think there's an issue there too.
Let's talk about that specific issue right there a little bit more. How has the shift away from printed music to projected lyrics changed the average Christian's experience of music, especially in the context of a worship service?
No, it's a great question. And obviously it deserves a much longer answer than I can give you. I think if you're a pastor or a worship leader, or again, a concerned parent, I think the key issues are that if you put songs on a screen, you're no longer curating because you can set anything on a screen. So I think you have to look at what that means. Are you protecting your church from songs that are not helpful? But even more than that, once you move away from the kind of a liturgical framework or expositional Bible teaching. Once you move away from those kind of guardrails, you're not sinning, but you are subject to kind of going after your whims rather than having a broad picture of the God of it. But you're less likely to sing immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light, inaccessible, hid from our eyes, most blessed, most glorious, the Ancient of Days, almighty, victorious, thy great name we praise. Because apart from anything else, it's not about us until the last three words. That's like, do you know what I mean? It's the only thing that's objective, or it's the only thing that's subjective. And we, modern worship craves just subjectiveness and also simple lyrics. Simple lyrics everybody can get the first time. So you've the creation issue. Then the second issue is the issue of words. I mean, if you're doing a hymnal, a lyric has to look good, feel good, be passed around people and go, wow, this is a beautiful lyric. Do you know what I mean? It has to have a poetic realm to it to be in it, because a hymnal lasts for 25 years. So when you're making a hymnal, this is another interesting point. When you make a hymnal, one of your questions has to be, will this hymn last for the duration of the publication? So we have to keep going back to, if this is going to last for 14 to 30 years, will the hymn be good for 14 to 30 years? So it's a different question. Then modern worshipers on Sunday are not going, oh, I wonder will our church be singing this in 25 years? No, most of them doesn't even go through their head. So
that goes back to one thing I was wondering about before. In contemporary music, a song 14 years old is ancient.
Yeah,
that's impossible to fathom. The turnover time is really quick. It's like a song goes from written, nobody's ever heard of it before, written to sung on the radio, super popular, and then it's just gone because there's a new one that's down from the same group and that everybody's listening to now. There's just not a lot of continuity there as well. That's, I think, another one of those changes. Now, technology has given us access to hundreds of thousands of songs to choose for congregational worship. Why should a church invest? And in many ways, we don't even necessarily have the architecture within our churches to handle the written books in some ways. Why should a church invest in a set of hardbound hymnals instead of just relying on a digital subscription to a song database?
Yeah, I think it's probably two or three different arguments for it. I think the first one is it gives you a curation. These are hymns that we feel are valuable. And so it gives people a sort of a safe level. Secondly, it helps people get a lot of the great hymns of history. The history issue is such an interesting issue because it really is. In politics, they talk about wraparound issues. Do you know what I mean? So, for example, privacy is a wraparound issue. The extreme right and the extreme left care about privacy. Everybody in the middle kind of goes, well, to be safe in this world, there's probably stuff happening, but we don't really care. It's not a major issue for us. In the church today, under 25s and over 60s really care about history. The folks in the middle don't really care about it so much. So it actually is, while it's something that the older generation are still shouting about, older worship leaders are shouting about, it's actually as vocal an issue for people who are under 25 because, they want to go into a city church and know that if you're at university, you want to go to church and you're thinking about life. A hymn that has been around since the 7th century or singing a version of the Psalms is a whole lot more believable than some shoddy piece of poetry that sounds like 10 years ago's music that somebody at the front is doing some acrobatics about. Do you know what I mean? And so I think people have to understand actually where culture is going faster than they can imagine, and so I think the great hymns of history, I think curation is huge. I think the great hymns of history is huge, but also I think having a publication like this, we live with this stuff more. We live with this stuff more. I had 4 grandparents, as many have, and they all had hymn books by their bedside.
Yeah.
They also had them on the piano in the living room. Right. And so you end up spending a lot of your dead time, instead of flicking onto your screen, on your phone, you actually just start reading. Here, I've just opened it here. May the mind of Christ my Savior live in me from day to day, by his love and power controlling all I do or say. Then may the word of God dwell richly. And may the love of Jesus fill me. May his beauty rest upon me. May I run the race before me. That was written by a lady, a brilliant poet, who invested most of her time in children's homes in London. So I will be pretty sure as a writer that as she wrote that, she was imagining some of the little girls that she'd rescued who were orphans, and she was praying that for them. And I'm filling my mind up with that right now because, I have these hymns all over my house. They probably want me to sign them, and I'm probably not going to go. I'm probably not going to sign them just because I have to give them away again. So I'm going to keep them. Don't tell Crossway, but they're probably listening. And they probably guessed I'll be doing that.
Well, let's talk about another Crossway author, John Piper. Often heard him say that he likes. Yeah, heard of him. He says he likes screens because they lift your eyes as you sing, and also when you're projecting your posture, you're projecting out and up. And at the same time, some of us at least can associate and remember hymns and hymnals with boring and rote singing.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of probably what you're up against. Do you worry about either of those points with this hymnal?
No, I mean, obviously, John would be the highest profile, what you would call low church, low church worship kind of advocate amongst the Gospel Coalition. Most of the Gospel Coalition, certainly the founders, would have a slightly more liturgical perspective. So it's worth just observing that. I think John's right in that. I mean, I conducted choirs from I was 13 till to today, but it was my first break into professional music was being a choir conductor. And the one of the foremost things you have to do is to get people to hold their music up and project out. So John is exactly right if you put it on the screens, but I don't think having the music on the screens negates doing this. I mean, the Sing Conference this year, we're going to have most of the words on the screens as well. A few times we'll just go to the books, but we'll expect people to hold the books, but also to have the screens as well. So it is much more than just technology.
Part of it's just training people's expectations.
Yeah.
There. I mean, I've been through plenty of services at this point that are contemporary and they feel like we're just going through the motions. You mentioned the acrobatics up front. It can often feel very performative in the same way that it can feel boring with a hymn. And I think with the younger generations that you mentioned, they don't actually even remember anything about hymns.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything about that experience in the church. So it's going to be a novel experience for a lot of them. Let's talk about liturgy. You've mentioned that a few different times in here. That's been a controversial point of late, and a sense that some have that they need to leave their church to go to a different denomination, or maybe even to become Catholic or Orthodox to be able to experience this liturgy and connection to history. How do you see this project, the Sing Hymnal, speaking into that controversy of late?
I think your point is a great one, Colin. And I mean, for what it's worth, we're seeing deconstruction at two broad levels of the confessional church right now. One of them is the person who life goes wrong and they kind of dump it as a bad job. But, given that that's always happened in history, and also given the spurious way of kind of easy faithism that has happened and continues to happen in our generation, you go on a camp in the summer, you go off to a youth event because you're chasing a girl or something, and you hear this amazing music and you have this feeling in your stomach and you think you're a Christian. Of course, you and I both know that's not. I mean, getting that flushed out, I'm not. I mean, I've got young teenage daughters. I don't dismiss the fear of deconstruction, but it's not. If you look at all the proportions and look at the stats of it, it's highly predictable. For the most part, what concerns me a lot more is the number of thoughtful leaders and businessmen who are involved at the heads of churches who are moving to Catholic churches, non-confessional, liturgical churches, Orthodox churches right now, simply because they are so sick of the nonsense at the front of our churches and the utterly empty and manipulated feeling that people are leaving church services with. And suddenly when they go into an Orthodox church, number one, it takes away individualism. Number two, there is a gospel shape to it that is just right. Of course, we don't necessarily agree with all the liturgical parts of all of those services, but there is still a largely gospel shape that, because God has created us and we're fearfully and wonderfully made, it just makes sense. And so it gives us a peace. There's a poetic beauty to it. And then there's a sense that this is our worship leader, but we've had 5 worship leaders in the last 13 years, and 2 of them had to be fired for immorality or whatever. And we're going to a church that they've been doing this since like 1648. Do you know what I mean? And suddenly everything seems a lot more sensible. And so as I said, I think that speaks to the wraparound issue that it is. Do you know what I mean? That there's an older generation, but there's also a younger generation who no longer accept all the presumptions that a previous generation had for church and are going back to first principles of logic. And for them, the liturgical service, which was why Luther was so determined to create a gospel-shaped liturgy, and Cranmer was so determined to create a gospel-shaped liturgy, because if we can get back to that, suddenly we have a framework for everything. And it is true to say a lot of these churches don't preach the gospel, and that's sad. But I would also say, as a second note, those churches have survived, and the liturgy and the hymns are the only thing preaching the gospel in those churches. Churches that didn't have that don't even survive. Do you know what I mean? No. So I think that we got to be careful how we use our logic there, because we can argue exactly the wrong thing or argue it actually upside down.
Right. Or prove too big of a point as well. Prove too much in the argument. Church members might be surprised to learn that musicians and preaching pastors do not always get along. Can this hymnal help bridge that?
That's going to be the quote. That's going to be the quote of this whole podcast. That is incredible.
I'm just trying to keep this calm.
Colin, when did this start?
This is shocking news to you, Keith. I know.
It must be the current political establishment. It was, blame them.
I mean, it is. I guess has it always been that way, or did some of the different changes that we've made in our expectations of music set us up for that conflict?
So I think the answer to that question, as you and I would both know, the answer to that question is yes and no. Musicians by their makeup are never the easiest people to get on with, and then even just some of the priorities and principles of historic evangelicalism candidly have not helped themselves in their relationship to those who are creative. And so there's endemic issues that would make interesting podcasts or PhD studies out of that. I think the problem more recently is two or threefold. One is there is a terrible theology of what worship and singing now is in the church that is far closer linked to sales and marketing and to therapy than it is to holy worship. And so we need to get a clear theology of what we're doing. Secondly, there is mass confusion. There is mass confusion compared to 50 years ago on what kind of songs we sing. If you were Presbyterian living in Alabama, you kind of knew how you sang. You all sang the same way, and whereas now it's everything. So there's a cultural change that hasn't quite landed yet. Any cultural change, whether it's a new pastor or a new house or a new dog in your house, require cultural changes and shifts. Yeah. And those haven't quite landed, I don't think. But I think there are some basic ones as well, in that because the modern worship leader is given such a pathetically high platform, they forget that they're there to serve a church and they have a boss. Do you know what I mean? So, for example, when we do Carnegie Hall or Albert Hall or whatever these shows, or playing Grand Ole Opry, doing 2 shows at Grand Ole Opry next week, we have lawyers who do our contracts and make sure that we can control our show and our message, and that they can't superimpose a message on us. When I'm leading in church, if the pastor says to me 5 minutes beforehand, I'm changing the song, or we're having to cut time because there's a backup in the car park, then I say, what do you cut? And he cuts me. He is my boss. I honor my pastor, and I honor they're my leadership. And there's a very clear structure that should be no less clear than military structure, in my opinion. So any church out there, any pastor out there who's scared to tell his worship leader something, or who the worship leader is able to do stuff and the pastor doesn't know how to tell him, I think I can already predict that I'm pretty much 90% sure you're heading for absolute chaos somewhere in the next 6 months to 6 years. And so I think that's maybe you disagree, Colin. I don't know.
No, when I was training for ministry, you start to see that we often run into the same problem for the same reasons. it would be the preacher who's really great at preaching, and people think, well, you don't need to care about his character because, and the qualifications of eldership, because look at how great a preacher is. It extends to youth ministry.
Yeah.
We don't really evaluate and expect a lot out of his character because he's great with kids and he loves hanging out with them.
He's
and
charismatic personality.
He's charismatic. And then in music, we don't seem to really value the character parts or the qualification parts, and we'll just throw somebody up there because their voice sounds great and they're good with the music, and not really understanding that people can be attracted to those things for really bad reasons, which is why the character requirements are so significant there. And then we wake up and we wonder why we have problems.
Yeah.
I don't think that should be that much of a mystery.
Yeah, no, 100% agree.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of these uses, Keith. I love the way you talked about by the piano and by the bedside.
Yeah.
And for all of life, I'm going to use that. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to use that. I love that. That's the way the interview started there with my own grandfather, and then we've got the piano there in the living room with the hymnal sitting on it right now. Are there other ways you expect or hope that this hymnal will be used? You mentioned some of the prayers and liturgies. People may be surprised to know there's 400. 400 prayers and liturgies.
Yeah, I hope it can be. I know when we talked about, we hope it can be a one-stop shop for all Christian leaders. So if you decide this is not what our church want, I still hope that each of the leaders in the church will buy it, because if you get it and you're going to do a call to worship tomorrow, or you have to go and do a thing for the youth ministry, or you have to go to an event where there's a bereavement, or you have to go and speak at a local school, school or social event in the Christmas season, or you have to, there are prayers and readings all the way through this. So we hope people, alongside their study Bible and their shorter catechism or whatever, or New City Catechism that they have, we hope it can become a reference book for all leaders and for all parents. And so that's one of the things I think which is a huge part of it, and as well as obviously musicians being able to use it wherever they are as well, I think is a good thing too.
Yeah, I'm already I got my copy from you guys and from Crossway, but I'm already thinking I'm going to need multiple copies for different parts of the room, different parts of the house. I'm going to wear these things out. Again, like I said, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Keith, just a couple more questions here. What do you hope the legacy of the Singing Hymnal will be 20 years from now? What would long-term success look like? I mean, certainly all of us as authors and publishers, we want sales, but you don't go into it just to sell books. You want it to change something. You want something to be different. 20 years, what do you hope's changed? Well,
I have to admit, I have actually no idea what the relative metrics are of this. So I would be entirely the wrong person to ask it. And I appreciate the fact that Crossway do care about that, and that's only right that they do. But I think there's, again, it's multiple levels. At the practical level, we said earlier, the two big issues that we feel are becoming a huge concern is the curation of what churches and families sing, and the lack of hymns that you will carry with you through life. And that is because of the theology, that is because of the melody, that is because of the artistry and poetry, which makes every part of us more intelligent, more sharp, more thoughtful. And so that is the two things that I think are if you ask me if in 5 to 25 years time, if evangelical churches across America and Britain and English speaking world have returned to singing more great hymns, or more of those churches are going, we use this hymnal, or we use a different hymnal, we set up our own hymnal for our community, or these are the 50 hymns, like our church have a thing that there's 50 hymns they want every kid to know by heart before they leave for college.
I love
Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so, that if those two things have happened, I think that is a positive result that creates healthier and holier Christians, Christian families, Christian communities. But at a second level, at the artist level, and even filtering then even more so into the spiritual level at the third level, for us to spend time gazing on the beauty of the Lord, at his wonders, and being able to sing those things then into the spiritual realm. The most of the testimonies will be individual stories. I have a friend who was Islamic, who became a Christian in a service of beautiful Christian worship, just singing hymns in 4-part harmony. The number of times we come, as what's what Rock of Ages say, helpless we come for grace, naked we come for dress. When we turn up on Sunday, Alistair Begg always described the congregation as being in quiet desperation. And I don't want that quiet desperation to be answered by some stupid rant of song at the front where you're repeating something 8 times and somebody at the front's trying to distract you and make you look at them. What I want them to do is to sing the beauty of the Lord Jesus in a way that they know in a fresh way. So that, if you take something like Hark the Herald Angels Sing, simply because that's still enough in the cultural milieu to be relatable to everybody. Most people who sing that every Christmas will chew on a different line. Each time they'll come about it again, they'll see a new way. And that's what great art does. Great art helps us see things in fresh ways. It helps us see things in bigger ways. It enlarges our vision, and it also makes us see things for all the beauty that they are. And so, at the end of the day, most of the ministry of this is what's happening as this family gather around the piano, as 60 people gather at a church on Sunday. And most of it is just a daily and lifetime service that does.
Oh, I love that. Keith, congratulations on the publication of this. I'm just, as everybody can see through this interview, I'm just thrilled. A singing hymnal. It's brand new. It's published with Crossway. Get a copy. It's gonna be great. From your bedside to your piano, family devotions, at your church. It's a great blessing. Thank you, Keith.
Colin, thank you. And thank you for your encouragement as we've gone through it. This has been great to hear from you occasionally, and to hear your enthusiasm for it actually means a huge amount. So thanks for all you guys are doing, and keep going.
Thanks, Keith. Thank you for listening to this episode of Gospelbound. For more interviews and to sign up for my new weekly newsletter, Unseen Things, head over to tgc.org/gospelbound. Rate and review Gospelbound on your favorite podcast platform so others can join us in this conversation. Until next time, remember, when we're bound to the gospel, we abound in hope.